Welcome back. As we wrapped up in the last video, as we discussed in the last video, we had just been talking about collective nouns. Now, perfect. Now again, collective nouns are nouns that act as a single unit, and we had been talking about the football team. Though there are many players on the team itself is seen as one acting unit. Same thing with government. There are multiple people in a government, but the government itself is seen as one unit. And the same thing with a class. There are many students in the class, there's a teacher in a class, but this particular class studies grammar and English mechanics because we view it as one collective unit. Now, when you're writing and when you are making pronouns, or writing with pronouns, I should say, you want to make your references clear. And your book details two ways in which pronoun use is not clear. And one is through ambiguous pronoun use. Now, ambiguous pronoun use absolutely kills readability. It throws understanding out the window, and an ambiguous pronoun use makes it very difficult for your reader to understand what it is you're trying to say. For instance, Enrico told Jim that he needed a better resume. Now, with that sentence, Enrico told Jim that he needed a better resume. Who is the he in this sentence? Is he Enrico? Is Enrico telling Jim that Enrico needs a better resume, as two friends discuss? Or is Enrico telling Jim that Jim needs a better resume? Is Enrico suggesting to Jim that a better resume is needed? We're not really sure because both of these people are men, we can assume, and he is a male pronoun. We don't know. However, by changing around some other words in our sentence, we can make clarity stronger. Enrico advised Jim to update his resume. Now, if Enrico is the one doing the advising, then we can reasonably assume that Jim has approached Enrico with a resume, and Enrico is telling Jim that Jim needs to update the resume. What's interesting about this lesson, about this section of the lesson, is that though the section is on ambiguous pronoun use, changing around other words in the sentence can bring the clarity that we're looking after. Because to be quite honest, it would sound a little awkward to say, Enrico advised Jim to update Jim's resume. But there are other ways that we could say this. We could write the sentence saying, Jim approached Enrico asking for advice on a resume. Enrico looked at Jim's resume and suggested he revise it or he update it. There are multiple ways to say that the resume needs to be fixed. For instance, again, we could say Enrico looked at Jim's resume and I know that a proper resume has the accent aigu, but for the purpose of QuickType, Enrico looked at Jim's resume and suggested edits. Or we could say looked at Enrico's resume and Enrico, suggested Jim edit his resume. There are multiple ways to edit a sentence so that the pronoun reference is very clear so that we know exactly who is speaking. Another instance of this is I put the glass on the shelf even though it was dirty. Well, the question becomes, what is it? What are we talking about? Is it the glass? Are we putting the dirty glass on the shelf? Or are we putting a glass on a dirty shelf? We don't really know what it is. But if we just move some adjectives around, then we can read, I put the dirty glass on the shelf. Boom, good to go. We know exactly what is dirty and why that might not be the best thing in the world. Yes, I put the dirty glass on the shelf instead of referring to it because we don't know what it is. It could be the glass, it could be the shelf. The other type of pronoun use that can really mess up our clarity is vague pronoun use. What's different about vague pronoun use as opposed to ambiguous pronoun use is that at least in ambiguous pronoun use, we have a couple of options to decide between. Enrico told Jim that he needed a better resume. Well, we know that it's going to be Enrico or Jim. Or it was dirty. We know that the it is either the glass or the shelf. But in vague pronoun use, we don't technically know at all what the antecedent is. For example, when Tom got to the clinic, they told him it was closed. Now let's be real here. We know that we can reasonably assume that they belong to the clinic. But we still don't necessarily know who from the clinic told Tom that it was closed. We also don't really know what kind of clinic it could be. It could be a medical clinic, it could be an athletic clinic. The clinic is just, in broad senses, a term for meetings, learnings, trainings. A clinic can be largely anything. And so to use they, we really have no idea what kind of clinic Tom is at or who told him it was closed. But if we change it to read, when Tom got to the clinic, the nurse told him it was closed, well, now we have a lot more detail just by changing the one pronoun into its antecedent. Now we know that if it's a nurse, it's probably some sort of medical clinic, say an urgent care or a hospital, and we know that it was a nurse and not an administrator or a secretary or a doctor telling Tom that the clinic was closed. We also have the sentence, before I finished writing my report, it ran out of paper. Now again, if we're reading this, we can probably assume that it refers to, say, a printer. But that's not necessarily the case. It could be that before I finished writing my report, the copy shop ran out of paper. Perhaps we needed to go to Office Depot or Office Max to get some paper, and there was no more paper on the shelves to be purchased before I finished writing my report. And therefore, sometimes it's better to be overly specific just to make sure our readers understand exactly what we're talking about. Because in this dependent clause, before I finished writing my report, we aren't identifying the location that we're at. We're not saying whether we're at home or at a library or at school. And so we don't entirely know where our subject is, and therefore we don't know what our subject is in the where our subject is in the dependent clause, and therefore we might not know what our subject is in the independent clause. So vague and ambiguous pronoun use can really mess up a person's understanding of the writing that's going on. When you're writing, you really want to make sure that your pronoun use is very clear, and sometimes it might mean avoiding pronoun use for a particular sentence just to make sure that your readers know exactly what you mean. Now, let's go over the various types of pronouns. In your textbook, we will be briefly discussing 9 different types of pronouns. Now, the 3 most common of these pronouns are subject, object, and possessive pronouns. These are our most common pronouns, the ones that you will see the most often, but it doesn't hurt to go ahead and tackle the other pronouns: intensive, reflexive, reciprocal, relative, interrogative, and demonstrative. But your 3 most common pronoun use that you'll see all the time, or rather, that you'll see most of the time, are subject, object, and possessive pronouns. And these are the three that you're most familiar with when it comes to discussing pronouns. So let's dive in. Again, the first three will be more of a review. We are familiar with subject pronouns. Subject pronouns are so called because they act as the subject of a sentence. As subjects, again, we as speakers of English write in our subject, verb, object writing style. So our subjects come first at the beginning of a sentence and they precede our verbs. Again, these are the pronouns that we're familiar with. He went to the store to buy some bread. She is a police officer. I want to go play sports, and you are going to succeed in life. Now, remember that you can be a singular or a plural pronoun. And as you can see here, I had typed out in an earlier edit some other sentences. You are going to succeed in life. You, again, could be speaking to every member of the class. For instance, you are going to succeed in life. Again, as Southerners in the great state of Alabama, we might also say, y'all are going to succeed in life. By all means, y'all is plural, but of course, don't use that in a formal paper. I want to go play sports. We want to go play sports. She is a police officer. He is buying bread. If we're talking about something like a baseball, it is rolling down a hill. Baseballs roll, they roll down hills. It is rolling down a hill. Again, these are the subject pronouns in the first, second, and third person. Oh, I forgot. They are going to a concert. Right, they is the third person plural. These come at the beginning of our independent clauses, and they are, if it's an active sentence, if the sentence is written in active voice, they are the ones that are performing the action, right? He went to the store. She is a police officer. But of course, if the sentence is written in passive voice, then the verb will be done to the subject. So it might be if we're talking about bread, right, because he went to the store to buy some bread, then we might say that it was eaten in the morning. If it is our bread, then the bread was eaten in the morning. That's a passive sentence, but again, by all means, it is a use of the subject pronoun it. Now I'm going to go ahead and pause this video, and we will start up our third video with the object pronouns.